slow today. All right, so we're good to go there. All right, we're live. So I'm going to get the all right, I'm going to hit the start webinar. We're ready to go.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening on our final conversation series of 2021 on behalf of PIAC and Parent Involvement Advisory Committee and the Parent and Community Engagement Office. Thank you for joining us this evening for this special speaker series. Tonight's topic is the future of education. And we have three engaging, interesting, and very experienced speakers tonight. Thank you so much to the speakers for joining us. I would like to now ask that we do the land, I'd like to provide the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. So thank you. I'd like to now I'd like to introduce, actually I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Felicia Cito-Lau and I'm one of the PIAC co-chairs. I'd like to now invite Dee Williams, my fellow Parent Involvement Advisory Committee co-chair, to bring forth the conversation agreement. Dee?
Thank you so much, Felicia. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see everyone here this evening. So just to set the ground for our conversation, we have a conversation agreement that we enter into. Staying engaged. Staying engaged means remaining morally, emotionally, intellectually, and socially involved in the dialogue, and acknowledging that we may experience discomfort. This norm acknowledges that discomfort is inevitable, especially in dialogue about race, and that participants make a commitment to bring issues into the open. It is not talking about these issues that creates divisiveness. The divisiveness already exists in the society, in our schools. It is through dialogue, even when uncomfortable, the healing and change begin. We are committed to speaking our truth. This means being open about thoughts and feelings and not saying what you think others want to hear. Expect and accept non-disclosure. This agreement asks participants to hang out in uncertainty and not rush to quick solutions, especially in relation to racial understanding, which requires ongoing dialogue. So again, I'd like to welcome everyone, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation this evening.
Thank you so much, Dee. I think I have the pleasure of introducing our three very engaging and very experienced panelists, speakers this evening. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Avis Glaze, who is currently the CEO of EduQuest International. Dr. Avis became the first K-12 educator to receive the Order of Ontario for her outstanding contribution to education. She's become internationally renowned as a thought leader in the field of education and as a founder and CEO, as I mentioned, of EduQuest International. Avis works tirelessly to address and provide solutions to the many challenges that educators face today. At home and abroad, many ministries of education have hired her consultancy services, booked her for workshops and seminars, and have engaged her as a keynote speaker at conferences worldwide, just as we've done this evening. Thank you, Dr. Avis Glaze, for joining us this evening. I also have the pleasure of introducing Bill Hogarth. And Bill was the Director of Education at York Regional District School Board for 16 years. I'm sure we have a lot of York Region fans of Bill's tonight joining us. He's a collaborative senior leader who, in periods of both expansion and consolidation over the last 40 years in 2 school boards, has had a broad range of experiences, expertise in developing and implementing strategic plans, board policy, ministry regulations, as well as curriculum and professional development programs. He's the past chair of Seneca College and has received an honorary doctorate from York University. He's currently on the board of University of Guelph, and in 2018, York Region District School Board recognized Bill's contributions with the naming of the Bill Hogarth Secondary School. Thanks for joining us tonight, Bill. Last but not least, we have Dwayne Matthews. He's the innovation evangelist and future of education strategist. Dwayne assists school boards, educators, and parents understand new and evolving themes in the 21st century, the future of work and how to prepare children to thrive in a rapidly evolving digital information-driven world. He's a former education lead at the Fulbert Applied Research Center and a venture partner of Yet to Ventures Secondary Fund. He's also an executive director at Technology Intelligence. He's a teacher and a recipient of the BAIE Trailblazer and Innovation Award. Thank you for joining us, Dwayne.
Thank you.
So to start us off, Dr. Avis Glaze, we'd love to have you start us off. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Felicia. And let me say a very special thanks as well to Michelle for organizing this session and all the contacts she has made with us. It has been a pleasure working with Michelle. And of course, I'm delighted to work once again with Bill Hogarth. I was associate director in York Region with Bill many, many years ago. And Dwayne, I was just delighted when I saw you on this program as well, because there's so much that you can help us with in terms of your area of expertise. It's a very exciting topic for me, and the future of education generally, but we also have to talk about the future of publicly funded education, which is so important to us. All our schools are prepared, all our students are prepared in our schools. They're the ones who you are working with daily. And I want to thank you all the organizers, the organizing committee, because you are all leaders. When we talk about leaders, please recognize that we're talking about leadership at all levels of the school system. And there's no leadership, to my mind, that's more important than classroom leadership. So that's extremely important. I want to talk about just a few assumptions to frame my comments, so you know where I'm coming from. The first was about leadership, the importance of listening, especially to teachers and principals, about what we need for schools. The second assumption is that we can judge how well we're doing by the levels of success achieved by our most vulnerable students. To my mind, if our vulnerable students, if our students who are not doing well are not improving, I cannot say that we're doing well. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Another assumption of mine is that leaders today must have a very strong commitment to human rights, because they're cognizant of their obligation to protect the grounds that are identified in our human rights code: race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, religion, gender, age, etc., sexual orientation, disability. So to my mind, future leaders today and future leaders must be human rights protectors and advocates. Another assumption is that in a truly equitable system, factors like socioeconomic status, race, and so on must not truncate students' possibilities. We must help students through high expectations. We must help them to exceed their perceived destinies. Leaders today must educate hearts as well as minds. For years, we have spent our time talking about the things that are cognitively based. I think we have to think about qualities like empathy and respect and those interpersonal competences which our students need to be successful in today's world. Another assumption is capacity building is key. People would, if they knew what to do, they would have done it. If we're not achieving success in certain areas, then it means we need to build capacity of those students. Another assumption is that education must change the trajectory of students. Policy must not, poverty must not determine a child's destiny. And finally, we need to look at leadership from a historical perspective as well. From the days when leadership in the 50s and 60s, when I looked at definitions of leadership, they talk about directing and controlling. Those words have changed as we move through areas of empowerment and so on. But today's leaders must make sure that the individuals that they are to serve are achieving at their very, very best. So I have then a few what I would call maybe imperatives. Number one is that we must recognize that the future belongs to those who can see it coming. We must look at the trends, and the trends that I like most are called the 21 Trends by Gary Marks. 3 of those trends I think are very important for us to bear in mind as we plan for the future of education. One trend says that in a series of tipping points, minorities will become majorities, creating ongoing challenge for social cohesion. The question is, are we preparing our minorities to become majorities? That's very, very important because that's already happening in many cases. The other trend I chose was trend number 7. It says pressure will grow for society to prepare students for jobs and careers that do not currently exist. Career development, and I hope I'll be able to expand on that important because career development is an equity issue. Think of the exposure that some students get and the myriad occupations that they are able to encounter. Other students, depending on their backgrounds, do not have the same exposure. So we must make sure that career development is important. The third area I picked from the trends was that scientific discoveries and societal realities will force widespread ethical changes. Ethics are important today. You know, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things I ask myself, what will happen when I'm an old woman in a nursing home? If I ask for a glass of water, will somebody give it to me? I think the answer is yes, depending on if you have educated hearts as well as minds, not only on the cognitive and affective forms of education, but for example, empathy. Are we preparing our students to be empathetic? And you may ask, can empathy be taught? Yes. In the discussion, if you're interested, then we can get into that. So number 2 then is to raise the bar for all students, especially Indigenous students. And I say especially Indigenous students because we learn that Indigenous students are the fastest growing group in Canada. And yet they're at the bottom of most of the hierarchies around achievement. We have a lot of information about Indigenous students and their challenges. We must make sure that we address them. Let's think also of Black students, who the Toronto District School Board has done extensive work and have data on these areas. We know that our Black students are not achieving at their potential. So there are students, what I'm talking about is disaggregating our data so that we know who needs to be helped in terms of student achievement. Next, there are a couple of statements made by a few people that I think we need to think about. For example, Michael Fuller, and we all know Michael, he said this: the new mission of schools is to achieve 100% success and to have specific explanations for addressing any figure that falls short of full success. Now, people get upset with me. Avis, how can we have 100% success? Even Michael has changed, because a few years ago he said 90 to 95% success, but he has changed. And I hope we will be able to talk about that. Are we prepared to work at 100% success? And if not, we have to think of whose children do we not want to be successful. Another comment was that the literacy demands that adolescents will face in the 21st century will be much higher than we want them to be. So the issue is, the question I want us all to consider is this: what specific actions are we going to take to realize the improvement in student achievement and well-being with a sense of urgency? We cannot have the same students at the bottom of the hierarchy anymore. The third area, I'm just watching my clock, I have 3 more minutes, is that we must institute actions to move our schools and districts along the continuum of equality, equity, and justice. We used to talk about equality, which was essentially equal treatment. We have long moved away from that. The OECD has a wonderful notion of this, where they have equality, equal treatment, equity, where everyone gets the supports that they need. But the area that I want us to move to in public education is justice, where you have individuals trying to watch a fence, a football game over a fence. They're all of different heights. And the supports you provide for these individuals so that they can all watch the football games together. But the justice component is one in which they change the fence, make it a chain link fence, so that all people can see through and watch that game. So that's very important, that in the future we move towards from equality to equity to justice. The next one is that we implement a developmentally based career development program. We can say more about that later on, because children must understand the relationship between learning and earning. They must understand what they're learning in school and how it relates to future occupations. Then there are 4 statements I want us to prove wrong in education. We have to do that for the future. And these are statements by seminal workers. I'll go through them very quickly. Number 1, by Yan Zhao: the longer students are in school, the less curious and the less creative they become. Do we believe that? Next, Tony Wagner says, high school students who exhibit creative personalities are more likely to drop out of school than other students. What are we going to do about that? Next one, and you will be very upset with this, by Kevin Kumashauer: schools are complicit with oppression. Ladies and gentlemen, when I read that years ago, I was almost upset. But when I read the article, I realized there is work that we need to do. Schools are complicit with oppression. Let's talk about that later on. And then the last one is, now, 2 more. Statistically speaking, the best advice I would give to a poor child eager to get ahead through education is to choose richer parents. Is that true, ladies and gentlemen? I don't think so. I think R.W. Connell must have said this tongue in cheek, you know. And then the last one, this is very important, by Robin DiAngelo. She says this: if schools were equal, we would not care what schools our children go to. But oh, we do care what schools our children go to, because schools are not equal. So we have to emphasize as well 21st century skills. And I'm going to stop there now, because we will have an opportunity to discuss that later. Let's emphasize the 21st century skills that our students need to be able to be global citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avis Glaze. That was excellent. I wanted to say that I particularly loved your fence allegory, from equality to equity to justice. You know, that really spoke to me. Thank you so much. That it was beautiful. I'd like to now ask Bill Hogarth to please continue our conversation. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very, very much, and it's wonderful to be here and be on the panel with Avis and Dwayne, and of course, before York Region, I spent 24 years in North York, so I know TDSB well, and it's a joy to be joining you here. It was fascinating to listen to Avis and to listen to the wonderful overview of what and how public education should deliver quality for students. And upon reflection, I was thinking of what has happened over this past 16 months. And when we're looking at the future of education, and when we're taking a look at what we want to have happen for students, I thought, why don't we talk with the students and really listen to what they are saying? What is important to them and how would they frame it? I want to focus on well-being and learning, not just well-being, but learning and well-being, learning and global citizenship, and learning and leadership. So those three areas. And I want to take it from the standpoint of the students and what they're saying. And being up front, these are students, grade 9 to grade 12. They're from Bill Hogarth Secondary. And I just chose some samples of what was important to those students. So let's look at learning and well-being and what they're saying. And let's listen to their voices. What are they saying about the past 16 months and their life as a student? And how do they see the future as we project it and what we want to have for those students, public education, and what should we do to go forward? So this is what the students were asked. What is the single most important lesson on your mind about the pandemic experience and learning? Student number 1 said, the biggest thing that we missed out on is the social aspect of high school. I was expecting to go to high school and make tons of friends and having a blast, and it just wasn't there. Student number 2, I commend the teachers for going above and beyond and for finding tools and strategies to keep us engaged virtually. But nothing compares to having that one-on-one, face-to-face interaction. Student number 3, when we're in a breakout room, I know the stress that you feel about who is going to unmute the mic and who's going to turn on the camera first. It's really hard because we don't see the character of that person. Student number 4, nothing can compare to the social structure of clubs and those little 30-second conversations that you can have with people in the hall. Nothing can compare to that. So what have we learned from these comments? They're fresh, they're new, they argue for the way that we should move forward and what we should do to help students in learning. And what we've always known is that peers are important to students, important to learning, important to wellness and mental health. And over the past 16 months, isolation has impacted mental health and wellness for students. They said it. We have increased the risk factor, which is isolation, and all but taken away that protective factor, which are the supports a student would receive from their peers and teachers. And I know Ava's well enough to know how important she thinks guiding teachers are. Those aren't there to give that support. BP, before pandemic, we talked about wellness and learning as a concern. Now we know that it's a defined priority if we want to make a difference to learning success. As Jean Clinton, a neurologist from McMaster, points out, learning and well-being are a double helix. Create a connected learning to wellness, and this presents an opportunity to transform a program delivery to be intentional about the importance of wellness and its connection to learning. So what she's saying, what the students are saying, is don't disconnect learning and well-being. And you know, we can use classroom pedagogy and school activities to build relationships and belongingness. And we can create a learning environment where students feel safe, valued, and have a sense of purpose and meaning. And we can be aware and active in addressing inequality of all kinds. We can engage in inspiring student activities that contribute to compassion and empathy as active citizens of the world. Well-being and learning feed off each other. Students have a social drive to connect. I feel, I learn. I need a return engagement. And you know, if we're looking to the future and we're looking to how we start off September 2021, it's our opportunity to acknowledge the priority shift that has been stoked by COVID-19 and the understanding that wellness and learning are linked. Point number 2, learning and global citizenship. The second impact issue that the students state does take us back to that student voice, because this is what the student says. Now that global issues and social issues have come to the forefront a lot more, we are becoming those active citizens, and we are applying this knowledge and experience. We have learned to help better the world around us. Hopefully, when we return to some semblance of normalcy, we can become more active citizens. People are building the courage to take more initiatives. The student said that. Students are saying they wish to live in dignity with others, the world, oneself. And the events of the past few days and months have demonstrated anything but dignity. As we seek an emerging learning horizon, students and community leaders should be working together to ensure systemic change through global citizenship. And a major part of student success must be how our young people perceive the world, change the world, how their attitudes and values demonstrate what it means to be a global citizen and to take responsibility for the general public good. How we change attitudes and values to incorporate this is a big part of what student success really means. And to do this, we need to keep working on making this whole topic a focus. The success of our students will be partially measured by their understanding of the world around them and how anti-racist education drives that focus. As a community, we need to ensure that we are committed to the culturally responsive and relevant pedagogies where every student sees themselves as a global citizen in an identity-affirming learning environment. As I believe not just now, but in the future, at the core of student success is a recognition that our young people feel their belief are valued and honored in their day-to-day learning. They must know that we are cognizant and will act to remove any systemic barriers to their success. We want to engage you. Last point, learning and leadership. And again, Avis touched on this, but I want to go back to what our students are saying and build on the points that Avis has made. It is clear that our students are hungry for leadership. As one student put it, the pandemic has sparked a lot of leadership in students. Even though it is harder to get involved, a lot of students are asking, what can I do to help? What contributions can I make? That was a grade 9 student. We can't go back to the way things were. And to quote a world leader, we need to bring back better if we want to make a future difference. In fact, there is a strong sense of urgency. As leaders, we need to be change agents. It is our moral imperative. And if not qualitatively, if not quantitatively, we can deal with and give information and show leadership through our students, our parents, our teachers about the learning impact during the pandemic. Again, as Michael Fullen, who we know is an educational thought leader, points out, leadership is in all of us. You in relation to others are the system. Now we should be subjectively identifying a new future. While online learning has an important place, I believe the students are saying it is far too narrow to fit us for life in 2021 and beyond. We cannot misuse the technology, we must leverage it. The students told us so. Leadership for learning is relational through building and participating in networks of collaboration so we can bring about change in thinking and doing. This pandemic has taught us that young people learn through opportunities to do work that has purpose and meaning with connections with adults and peers. This new group of leaders will embrace change as their future. I want us to reflect on a moment on a learning structure that does not talk about quadmester, semester, trimester. We know that research, that spaced practice makes a difference to learning, and more importantly, the retention of learning. There are different learning structures that are substantially validated and alternatives to engaging students in their learning. That, I believe, is the future. Because brave leaders transform policies, resources, and actions. And our students are asking for that change. So it requires risk. It requires us taking a look at coordination, takes a look at us finding ways of engaging, and it finds its way to build in global competencies that students can call universals. So as we take a look at the future, as we take a look at leadership, the learning future is up for grabs. So I ask the question, where is leadership? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill Hogarth. I love the fact that you spoke about student voice, and hearing that. I'm hearing it loud and clear. Hearing that they miss the hallway interactions. It mirrors very much, I think, the adult experience of missing out on those hallway interactions in our offices as well during this pandemic. Thank you very much for incorporating student voice. It's so powerful to hear. I'd like to invite Dwayne Matthews next to share his thoughts. Thank you so much, Dwayne.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Glaze and Bill. Thank you very much for your points. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate this conversation. Probably more than most of you know, I spend most of my waking hours thinking about the future of education, as my wife will begrudgingly attest. And so she's pretty happy that I'm having a conversation with people that are not her tonight on this topic. So thank you very much. One of the things that I wanted to address, and I really wanted to take a different view on a lot of the points. And the point that I wanted to address was really equity. And as we think about equity and we think about it in the future, a lot of times when I hear people talking about equity, it is spoken from an altruistic point of view, a point of view of, a right or a wrong that we need to right. And I completely agree, but I don't think that that's the driving factor that's going to be sustained over a long period of time. And history has taught us that. History has taught us that altruism actually runs out. There are a number of experiments that we can do that I could point you to that would prove that in other people and most definitely in yourself. So what becomes really important is to create a system of trust that sustains a certain amount of equity. And so we have to find a driving force. And so, I believe it was Dr. Glaze that pointed out the difference between equity and equality. And a lot of times when people are thinking about equity, they're actually thinking about equality. They're thinking about everybody having the same or everybody having less. And equity is not necessarily about everybody having less or everybody having the same. It goes into the idea of fairness and justice. Mm-hmm. Now, fairness and justice, I think, is a reasonably challenging thing to nail down, because it really changes fairness and justice depending on the time, depending on your geography, and depending on your place and perspective. And so if you will permit me, I would like to present another idea. But first, before I do that, I really want to give a little bit of context. So, if we think about school in of itself, we realize that school, formal education, has really been about two things. And the two things it's been about is prosperity of economy and technology. Now, most people say, well, Dwayne, do you really think that school has always been about technology? And so my answer is yes. We've used 600-year-old technology and we put it into a Prussian model, probably about 200 years ago. We surrounded that center technology with supporting technology. In 1662, we added a pencil. In 1888, we added the pen. And if we really want to get futuristic, in 1972, we had email. And so we build that, and we believe so strongly in the power to transform economy in this technology that we insisted that all of our children, from the time they turn 6 years old and all the way to grade 12, that they should go to school. We sent them to strangers who kept them for 6 hours a day, typically for about 194 days a year, which is more time than we typically spend with our own children. That's how important we believe that this was. Now, why is that important? Well, maybe about 150 years ago, 98% of us were farmers. And farming is probably the most important thing that we can do because we all need to eat. Now, only 2% of us are farmers. And the challenge is not enough food. The challenge is too much food and a way to distribute that food. And so the distribution of the food is important. Why? Because we've switched a whole modality and we haven't switched our premises. So what was the premise? Well, the premise was you would go to school and you would use this 600-year-old technology. And this 600-year-old technology would help to place you in the overall economy. And that overall economy, we would all hopefully raise the prosperity levels of everyone. Now, we know that's not true, and we'll come back to that in a moment, but that was the hope. That was the hope. And so what has happened? Well, if you are using books, I cannot take 100 books with me. I have to memorize some of that book. So we set up a series of stage gates, and those gates got us through. And eventually the promised land was some form of post-secondary education. And this was how we ensured the highest probability of our success. And if you were able to remember really well, you did really well. You got the A's and the B's. If not so much, you got the C's and the D's. But the overall idea was you went into an economy that was based on a factory style economy. Now today, the economy is shifting. And it is shifting at an exponential speed from factory style to knowledge economy. But we're still using very old premises of learning and very old premises that were quite successful to empower this new economy. So my first question is, today in Canada, if we found a school somewhere and we were able to see the school and the school had no books, would we accept it? Would we accept it? We have this profound technology and we have none. But now today we have about 4 or 5 technologies converging all around the power of competition, doubling every 18 to 24 months in terms of power and process. So now that we have a technology that is going to impact the overall economy, are we doing enough? Or are we lost in a false binary conversation of screen or no screen, technology or no technology, when school has always been about technology? Now, you may ask, what does this have to do with equity? Well, it has a lot to do with equity. And not equity in the altruistic sense, but equity in terms of an imperative. And why is it an imperative? Well, it's morally imperative. One could argue that. But that's not really the argument that I'd like to make. If we are engaged in a knowledge economy and the prosperity, the overall prosperity of our country, the national security of our country, and we have very, very specific examples in the last 2 weeks around national security and our ability to defend ourselves. If we're thinking about those key pieces, then we need more brains on deck. I believe it was Dr. Glaze that said 100%. Typically right now, if we think of post-secondary education, Canada is the most post-secondary educated country on planet Earth at 50%. Ironically, if I got a 50% coming home to my mom, would she think that I was doing well or would she think that I was not doing well? So the institution that is doling out the marks to me is functioning at about a 50% over the last 2 decades. So it's not successful. That would give us, if we were to go with a classic system, probably about a D, right? We would need an IEP. We need an individual education plan to really upgrade ourselves. And so that's what I think we need. I think we need an individual education plan. Now, why do we need that? We need to increase the human potential for the national prosperity and personal prosperity of our country and the region. And that's very, very important. If we look to our neighbors to the south, if we can see where there was the most discord, I bet you that there was a direct line between prosperity and peace. Peace has always been around interdependence, innovation, and prosperity. If these leave, we realize that we have certain people that now do not believe in the social contract that we put forth, which is we are citizens and we give up a certain amount of freedom in order to have prosperity and to live a good life. So this becomes really, really important. Now, when I think of the future of education, I think of it like this. I think the future of education is human-led, purpose-driven, and technology augmented. The digital technology, the analog technology, they're hammers, they're screwdrivers, they're tools that we use, but we have to create a common north that says to us, what does 2030 look like? Are we preparing our students for 2019 and before, or are we preparing our students for 2030? Are we looking at our feet or are we looking to the stars? And so I wanted to give a couple of examples, if you will, of some of the ways that I believe that we can think about this. So if you permit me, I will attempt to share my screen. And I'm all here excited talking about technology. Let's see if this works. So as I think about the future of technology, I think about building a bridge from the present to the future. So we have a present system that's based on a premise. That premise is based on scarcity. Ironically, it's based on discrimination and categorization. And so as we categorize and discriminate to move people through to get into a small space of post-secondary education, we have to think about how do we do that? And so the way that we do that is, well, we look around us and we grab from ideas from other industries. And what have other industries done? Other industries have started to personalize at scale. I believe we need to personalize learning at scale. So before I talk a little bit about that, and just to make sure that I'm cognizant of my time, I'm gonna click my watch here and give me a little bit of time so I don't run over. But one of the things that I'd like to look at is, here's preparing the world for 2019 and before. Here's the PISA worldwide ranking. And if you look, the countries in the green are the ones that are doing very well. The ones in the red are the ones that are not doing so well. And Canada is ranked number 6. And that's really, really important because just behind Canada is Taiwan and Finland. And I hear lots of people really excited about Finland, but we actually beat Finland. Go Canada. But just above Canada is Estonia. And Estonia has really focused on looking to the future. Now, you would remember that Estonia recently reestablished itself as a country around 1990 when the Berlin Wall fell. I know I probably look a little too young to know what the Berlin Wall was, but you know, I was probably about maybe 6 months. Just joking. But we will see that this is sort of what it looks like, right? A very standard sort of model, and it's merging into the future. But here's the problem. The economy is being digitally transformed by the convergence of fourth industrial revolution technology. And the old model was not designed for the speed of this shift. The students are being prepared really well for the old model, but that old model is quickly being replaced. And there are very structural challenges that we have. And typically in any sort of technology disruption, we see that the big structural challenge is the level of gatekeepers that we have holding the gates. And so if we're to really deal with this, then we have to deal with some of those gates. One of the gates, age-based grouping, 194 days, these kinds of things, geographic location, we have to think about. Dr. Glaze mentioned about schools being equal. I know that Toronto, the housing market is going absolutely crazy as people try to figure out where are the good schools, because that's where we want to buy the houses. So here's an example of that problem. Here's an example of that problem. In the last few weeks, we've seen massive cyber attacks on really important critical infrastructure. The entire United States was hit with the solar winds all the way into the Pentagon, no response. An entire region for gas shut down, no response. Just a few days ago, all the largest meatpacking company on the planet shut down, no response. There are over 3.5 million high-paying cybersecurity jobs open after we took everybody on planet Earth and we filled those positions. 800,000 of those jobs are in Canada today. How many courses can we take in cybersecurity today in Ontario at a high school? How many courses? How many educators are aware of the urgency of this problem? These are profound, profound challenges that are a challenge to our prosperity and national security, but they're also a massive opportunity, right? There's a massive opportunity. There's an economy to when things are rare, what happens? When things are rare, the price goes up. So when we talk about equity, we talk about engaging Indigenous, and we talk about engaging the disadvantaged, we're talking about jobs like these, right? We look at jobs like these, we literally can change people's lives in about 120 days. This is possible today. So these are the types of things that I think that are really, really important when we're starting to think about fundamental change. Now imagine if I could take someone in a lower income neighborhood, I could train them, and in 120 days, I could financially change their outcome, their economic outcome. This is possible today. This is possible today. So these are the types of changes that I think are fundamental when we think about the future of education. So how do we do that? Well, at first we have to really focus. We have to drill down on, are we preparing students for 2019 or 2030? What is our vision? Right, there's a quote, and I'm probably gonna get it wrong because I don't have it on here, but it says, strategy with no tactics is the long road to victory. Tactics with no strategy is the noise before defeat. If we're constantly looking at our feet, just thinking about things that are tactical, we're going to run out of time. So I just want to go through a couple of examples really quickly, and then I'm going to go back to the panel. So how do we build a bridge to the future? Well, we have to build a bridge. We have to make sure that it's personalized, culturally responsive, and technology augmented. So I wanted to give an example. So this is an example of a project that's done with Cisco. Cisco's working on a project called Connected North. And what they looked at, first they thought, you know what, we're going to go up north and we're going to bring digital technology to indigenous communities. And they started to do that, and the project was failing. And so they wanted to know why. Well, it was because it wasn't human-led. So what they did was they really looked at a complete 360 view of how they can transform those communities. They looked at visual field trips, cultural exchange, very specifically role models and mentors of the indigenous community. They looked at things like future of education preparation and what was the kind of impact that it had. They affected 25,000 students as of May 28. They leveraged 85 indigenous role models, and they worked with the indigenous role models to design a curriculum that leveraged technology to augment itself, to be able to expand into that space. Now imagine 108 schools, and particularly after the last couple of weeks, imagine people having the ability to not to have to go to a physical building. A lot of conversation around mental health talks about, lots of students, they miss being in the space of school, my son included, but there are lots of students, when we look at the numbers of who signed into the virtual schools and didn't go back when the schools opened, we see a really high number of visible minorities, a really high number of people in lower socioeconomic communities. And so I think that's a signal as well. Dr. Glaze talked a little bit about, if the whole group is not going, we kind of have to measure ourselves by who's not doing the best. And so we can start to see some clues there when we look at the data and we think about how can we torment this data to make sure that we're getting the information that we want. Here's what it looks like. Here, if you permit me, a couple more examples. One of the things that we talked about was the idea of digital transformation of work. And one of the things that we know is that coding has sort of hit our curriculum. There are a number of different organizations that are putting out content for free. This is an example from Apple. Apple has something called Everyone Can Code. It's online, it's free. You can get it. You can go all the way from I can't code to I have a certification and I can build an entire company, all for free online. It's right there. Here's another example. This is from Nelson. Nelson has come up with a digital platform called Edwin. And what I think really interesting about this is, my son, he does math at a grade 7 level. He's in grade 6. He writes at a grade 4 level and reads at a grade 10 level. So what grade is he in? Where is he doing well and where is he not doing well? Well, I'll tell you where he is. He's exactly where he's supposed to be. And for me to meet him, I have to go to him and meet him where he is and get him to the next step, regardless of 194 days. So this allows us to do that. Here's another example of machine learning. This is from a company in Australia, and writing and communication is one of the most important components. And this actually has a machine learning platform that goes through and checks in real time, pulls up information, looks at the 6 traits of learning, and puts that information back to the teacher. This costs like $2 to $3 a student. The innovations are here. It's not necessarily about the shiny thing. It's about what are we trying to do? What are we preparing them for? And then what hammers and screwdrivers do we need? So the last one that I will look at, I will talk a little bit about a project that we did. And one of the projects that we did, we took my son who is in a public school here. We took 2 children out in another part of the country in Calgary, and we took private school children, all different ranges, and we did one project together inside a virtual space. That virtual space, expensive headset, yes, but a flat device, we could get to it in a mixed reality environment. And this is just ahead of me right now. This is what it would look like. And I can't show you right now because I'm moving and there are Paw Patrol toys everywhere. But the idea is bridging the different socioeconomic groups into one project so they can learn about each other. They can understand each other's challenges. They can understand each other's opportunities, as opposed to thinking, I don't know what that group is doing over there, and I'm generally afraid of them, and I'm afraid to say, and that's creating a certain amount of social anxiety. So I'm going to stop there, and thank you very much for allowing me. I think I've gone a little bit over, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dwayne Matthews. You know, it's very interesting that you spoke about, you know, the tie-in of school, historical schooling with, you know, how it's tied into the country's prosperity of the economy. And I definitely took that away with me. Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask, to thank all the panelists and all the speakers for sharing this evening. I wanted to let all the participants know that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we will go through them as much as we can. All right. I think we have, I know I have a few questions, but we do have, I'll look in the Q&A. The question is about how school prepares students for future careers, and how it would steer the presentation. Happy it's highlighted. Okay, so I guess that's the question. How school prepares students for future careers. Who would like to take that? I think Dr. Glaze, you touched on it, and so did you, Bill, and obviously Dwayne. So maybe we'll have each one of you, you know, say a few words. Oh, Dr. Glaze, you're muted actually. Oh, you're still muted. Let's see if we can get you on.
Okay.
There you are.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, but that was exciting. You know, listening to Bill and the focus on students, Dwayne, you said so many things that I'm also reflecting on. One of the things, Dwayne, that I'm delighted you touched on was the whole issue of career development, as I mentioned earlier, because I think, as I said earlier on, it's an equity issue. Dwayne, when you mention a job like cybersecurity and the number of possibilities and opportunities, and you ask yourself, how will certain students have access to these emerging occupations? What kind of guidance and counseling? And you may not know that I was once a guidance counselor, but what kind of guidance and counseling are students getting in their schools? Right now, and years ago, I mean, in the 80s, I think I helped to write the document on career development from the ministry's point of view. But it's an uneven field. Some schools are doing a great job, but others are not. And I think we cannot rely on just a few guidance counselors. We have to rely on all teachers to help to show students the relationship, for example, between their subject area and occupations. In other words, if you're an English teacher, what are the occupations related to English? And have students do that. Now, let me give you one example. When I was in a school years ago, and I had to, as a vice principal, I had to deal with a lot of problems all the time. And I thought, why don't I just get in my calendar 3 or 4 kids who are really doing well every day? So I asked the secretary to put those kids in. One little boy, for example, he came to me from a very poor neighborhood, marks 99, 100 in mathematics. And I said, what do you want to do? He says, Miss, I want to be a construction worker. That's what my dad does. You see, that's the thing again. Kids are limited by what their parents and others do. And I said, that's fine. That's a great job. But have you thought of other things? He said, Miss, what else? I said, well, come to me once per week and we will explore occupations. I wanted to teach exploration skills because you need that at any point in your life. If you lose your job at 40, you have to know how to explore. This little lad said to me, well, miss, whatever you do, I want to keep, I'm good at the sciences, I'm good at mathematics, but I'm also good at art. And I want to keep all of those in whatever subject I choose. As we explored week in, week out, guess what we came up with that really excited him? Medical illustrator. Now, you know what they do. They're those people who prepare drawings for textbooks and so on. That young lad, he was excited because he combined art with the science and so on. The question is, and Dwayne touched on this, here is a kid from a working class background. How is the school going to expose that kid and broaden that kid's career options so that a working class kid who has never heard about a medical illustrator, just as Wayne talked about cybersecurity jobs, how are we going to expand their career options? And I think that's what schools need to do more of. Because if we don't, then career development becomes an equity issue. And we're only replicating the status quo so that the richer kids will always get the options and the poorer kids will be sometimes limited by their exposure.
I think too, if I could add to Avis's great insight and story, I think if we check into our secondary schools now, there are more co-op opportunities than there was 5 years ago. And I think that's very important because even at University of Guelph, experiential learning is becoming the watchword. So I see the expansion, but I mentioned in my comments about the limitations of the structure, the semester structure, the quadmester structure. How can we find a way to take the story that Ava shared and make sure that every student has that learning opportunity to check out the career they want to pursue? So the more we can do that inside our school system to allow us to work with the community outside the school system, the more stories we can tell, like the one Ava's just shared with us. So the more we can deal with and take a look at co-op, I mean, we know what Waterloo has done with co-op programs, but I see the expansion in our secondary schools as well.
So, and great points, and thank you very much for sharing those points. And Bill, I agree with you 100%. I think the structure is what needs to change. Now, if the structure was built for a factory, and we're trying to prepare somebody for knowledge base, then we have to look at the structure of knowledge base. And what's the structure of knowledge base? The structure of knowledge base is personalized. It's personalized, it's geographically agnostic, it's time agnostic, it's space agnostic. So, you know, I asked myself a question when my son was going through this last section of his schooling. Does he need to have synchronous learning? Well, some parents would say, my child needs synchronous learning. Some parents would say, my child needs asynchronous learning. Some parents would say, my child only needs 2 hours, and then they could do it another time. Some parents would say, you know, my child stays up late at night, and they can work then. And so I think they should have those options. I think the options should be personalized. Somebody talked about oppression. You know, in the 1960s in the United States, you know, Rosa Parks, she went to war with a structure, a social war, to be able to sit at the front of the bus. And when I get on the bus, well, I don't just sit at the front. I sit where I want. As a matter of fact, I sit on the bus, I take a taxi, I drive my car, take an Uber. I want all of those options at my disposal. And so I believe we have to work at thinking about how do we get kids all of those options personalized and at scale. If we're thinking 20 to 30 kids in a class, if we're having the argument, you know, is it 23, is it 30, is it 40? We still have all these people that we've put into a square and we force them to stay there for 6 hours, giving them maybe 2 or 3 opportunities to go to the bathroom. So is it tied to oppression? Most definitely. You would never tolerate that at work. You would never tolerate that you had to ask your boss when to eat and when to go to the bathroom. You just wouldn't do it. I go, but we have that today. And you know, we said at the beginning, a difficult conversation. It's a difficult conversation for people to have. So Here's where I think we can start. We can come all the way back. And the first thing that we should start doing is we should think that information is a commodity. So the memorizing of information, all of it, means that we're preparing students to compete against a machine. Doesn't make any sense. What we have to do is we have to think about synthesis and aggregation of information. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by creating a framework for learning. And we do that by asking a certain quality and type of questions, a certain type of investigation. And there's really great ways to do that. There's project-based learning, there is design thinking. There are a number of different frameworks. So I don't think that we should think about what job do you want to do, because no teacher today knows what job a child should be doing, right? I was very cross when a teacher asked my son, what do you want to do? I said, never ask him that again. I go, because you don't know. I go, so what do you know? What you do know is he needs to create a utility belt of superpowers. And he needs to be able to pull on that utility belt, much like Batman, when he gets into a situation. And if his job gets eviscerated because of machine learning, he needs to have this tool belt that makes him very powerful to go into another. I went from education, and I went to a world of business, into a world of tech transfer, into a world of venture, and I have no degree besides my education degree. And so I was able to do that because I learned very quickly how to look at mental frameworks. So I think the focus really needs to be, what are the mental frameworks? Now, are we going to have to memorize some things? Most definitely. And they're very specific.
Repetition and things that are evidence-based. And so we know what those things are. We know what those things are. I think my AirPods went out, so I don't know if you can still hear me.
We can hear you now.
We got you.
Because I was gonna technology, I was gonna switch AirPods. But so to me, I think it really comes down to, how do we switch and go from over-indexing on content to a more balanced approach of mental frameworks, habit formation, and then looking for the different hammers and screwdrivers to augment what we're doing. If we understand questions and we do a really good job at that, if we understand projects, then we can go and we can constantly figure out new things that we can't see. I really appreciate Dr. Avis's comment. I taught at an inner city school in Scarborough. They've recently torn the school down after I left. I don't know if that was by accident or not. Maybe I did a bad job. And I taught at a private school in South America for the extremely wealthy. And what I noticed was the hardware of the children were the same. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely the same. Software, on the other hand, very, very different. And let me just give you one example, if you will. I was standing outside in the yard and all the kids just started to go inside to their classroom. And I was wondering, where are they going? I couldn't understand. How did they all go into class? And so I went and I asked the principal, I said, how did all the kids go to class without the bell? She said, you used to teach at a public school where they teach kids how to be employees. She goes, here, we teach kids how to be employers and to create value. So they need to value the most important thing they have, which was time. Just that slight adjustment.
I want to ask you something, Wayne, just for us to explore just one thing. When you said you didn't want the teachers to ask your son, what do you want to do? Let me suggest something, Wayne, because we agree on so many things. But a study was done many years ago of about 40,000 Canadian young people. And it was by Breton study, I think it was. One of the things that they found was that a lot of the anxiety, and these days people would call them mental health problems too, that young people experience at 15, 16, 17, related to two things: career indecision. They had no clue what they wanted to do. And there were some imminent decisions to be made: going to college, going to university, going to the workforce. So the anxiety that causes young people is really something that we need to think about. So the thing is, and I think you probably may agree with me, it's not so much that we don't do the career development, which is age and developmentally related. You don't ask little 4-year-olds what do they want to do, although some of them, Dwayne, I remember going to somebody's house, 2 university professors. I asked their 4-year-old, what would you like to do later on? Oh, I'd like to be a paleontologist. 4 years old. See the social class again? How many little kids know about paleontologists? So I would suggest, Wayne, and having been a guidance counselor, if students are going through school, others are making decisions, others know where they're going, if they get to 15, 16 and don't have a clue, it's going to cause a lot of anxiety and mental health issues. So how do we make this career search and development age and stage related? To me, that's one of the questions too.
I
So-
want to add to that, Dwayne. I think your comment about the mental model is so important to add into what Avis has said, because the students I interviewed talked about creating a universal. So I think the students are ready to take a look at what that universal might be and what that would look like. So again, how can we get every student understanding what a paleontologist is, and how can we create that, if you will, that universal or mental framework that it moves beyond to where you were talking about?
So, and I appreciate both of your points. And I do think that we do need to go to student-led and student-focused, but let me see if I can deal with them one at a time. I agree with you, Dr. Glaze, that when that study was done, that the idea of indecision around career is important. I just told this story to my son. I went to university and I didn't do math and sciences at university. And so every single humanities course that I could possibly take, I took. And the reason that I did that is because I didn't know where I was going to be when I came out at the other end. And how I became an educator was I was standing in the line at the registrar's office about to pay off my student loan. And my ex-girlfriend at the time, who's now currently my wife, was standing across and she said, "What are you doing after school?" And I said, "I don't know." She goes, "I'm thinking I want to be a teacher. Here are the applications." And she handed me an application.
Interesting.
Right. And so I think the vast majority of people, this is the reality of their life. The vast majority of people that work, 50% of the population, they work downtown.
Right.
They sort of slide into a job somewhere maybe, or, they fall into another space. They don't necessarily know it. And why is it important to grab that ambiguity? Well, it's important because 50% of all the jobs today will be gone tomorrow.
That's right.
But there's a lot more jobs that will be created in the future. And so to grab onto the opportunity, let's go with cybersecurity for a moment. Like, who do people want in cybersecurity? Well, the first thing is it's missing from the very educated and the affluent to the lower, because we have 3.5 million spots open, right? So not a lot of people know about it. The jobs are starting at about $100,000 at an entry level. People are moving right up to $200,000. They don't need to come in. They don't care if your pants is low. They don't care if you have braids. What they really want is your ability to ask questions, and they want to know that you play video games really, really well. And they want you to have a little bit of an edge, right? So all of a sudden, you start realizing the skill set or the tools are what becomes important. And instead of thinking about what job do I want to do, start thinking, what kind of life and what kind of contribution would I like to personally make? So once I have a personal mission and I build tools around that mission, as the jobs change, I can start to think, is that aligned with me?
Yes.
Aligned with the kind of values that I have? Am I being true to my mission? And if I'm true to my mission, any kind of anxiety that I meet is going to be really sort of energizing to me because I'm going to feel I'm on this purpose, I'm on this journey, and I'm driving towards this mission. And today it may be this, today it may be that. If you go through a career path of somebody that's very innovative, there's this key driving mission that comes down the middle, and all of the different positions and stuff change. Think of a minister in the government.
Yeah, it is.
So I have a few questions in the Q&A. If we could, they'll probably touch on all of the information. It seems to be like a very integrated conversation for sure. So the first one is education a right or a privilege? And I'm going to add on to that question with the next question. What are your thoughts about digital distraction? Students spending hours due to addiction to social media, games, messaging, etc. How does this impede their learning? And can online learning meet the students' mental health needs? Those three questions are kind of interlinked. Who'd like to take a first stab at that?
I'm happy to go for it if no one else will.
Dwayne.
Go with it, Ray.
So let's start off with online learning, and then we'll find our way back to digital distraction. If we see online learning as an either or proposition, and we put it in terms of mental health, then no, it can't. But if we look at the structure itself, and we start to think about the nuance, we'll be able to find a little bit of truth in there. So, do I have to be online for 6 hours a day in front of a screen? Well, no. If I gave myself a glass of wine, the best, most expensive wine, and I decided to sit in front of Netflix and watch my most favorite shows for 6 hours a day, 192 days, would I come out of that mentally healthy? No. So I don't think synchronous learning in a framework, an emergency remote framework, is the best idea. I personally would have done it a little differently. Now, that being said, is there a component of online that is an equalizer? I definitely agree. I definitely agree that it's an equalizer, certain components of it inside of a particular framework. Now, if we go back to digital distraction, I think that's really, really important. So a lot of times when we think about digital distraction, we think about screen in general. And the challenge with digital distraction is not necessarily screen itself. The challenge is a type of conditioning that's buried in certain applications. And that type of conditioning is called variable scheduled conditioning. And we know in a lab that if we take variable scheduled conditioning, we can get mice to eat their legs off to do something, right? So we know the power of that. And you can feel that with notifications. You can feel that with opening the fridge and trying to think, is there something sugary in there for me? There are a number of different ways. So we need to deal with that. The other component, I think, with digital is that we also need to look at the algorithm itself. How is that algorithm working for me? And the very last piece that I think is a critical component is the idea of malicious bots online that are designed to consume our attention. If our students are taught that they're in an economy of attention, then they would be better versed to deal with a lot of these challenges. So I don't think it's an either or proposition. I think there's a quote by Conrad Gessner from the 16th century, and he said there's a technology that's coming that will destroy the minds of our children. It will destroy their ability to learn and to think. And the technology that he was talking about was a book. And so what did we do with the book? We decided which books work and which books don't. There's certain books that I can't get in a school. And I think it's really, really important that we start thinking about not is the technology going away, but we start thinking about what tools do we use and when and how.
Has the last 16 months skewed our impression of online learning and digital?
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think it's a good thing. And I'll tell you why. In my phone right now, there are 11.6 billion transistors on a single chip. And I will say that to you, and you'll remain sitting in your seat. That should make you fall off your seat. That's more transistors than we have human beings on planet Earth. When technology gets there, there's a great body of work by Clayton Christensen. When technology gets there, when we're over-indexed on the technology or overserved, that's when the technology starts to become really useful, because we move from the shininess of the technology and we start thinking about what job do I need to get done and what tools do I need to go and get them? What techniques? You mentioned spaced repetition. There's a technique that's sitting in the halls of neuroscience and it's waiting for us.
That's right.
Right? It's waiting for us. All the grades would go up if we just taught that 20 minutes a day. We would be amazed, but it's waiting for us. And so now we're starting to think, well, we don't want this. So what do we want? Now we can start thinking about what we want versus what all these ed tech companies were giving us.
Great
Wow.
insights. Great insight.
Amazing insights. It's not
Thank
either
you.
or. That's a great message.
I think that we have one question from esteemed Michelle Monroe we'd like to hear from.
And I appreciate the opportunity to ask it because, Dwayne, you're blowing up my mind right now. And I'm going to simplify this question as a parent, because as a parent, I have a child that will be starting high school. And one of the things that has been forefront on my mind is there are elements where we're hearing now about we need to make this decision about whether we like virtual or don't like virtual. We're not being offered any other opportunity. You either choose bricks and mortar or virtual. And so what I'm hearing you say is that's the wrong questions districts are asking families, that we're just in the wrong framework. But just as parents, we should be expanding our own framework. That if we stay within just this lens of is my child doing virtual or bricks and mortar, that we're missing a larger conversation about what's in the best interest of our children's learning and the future of our children, right? And I like it where you said, and I'm remaining to look at my feet, not the stars. So could you talk a bit to parents who are out there right now who I know our district and every district across this province, and I dare say country, will be offering them these two choices, right? What can they say to their districts when those choices come where, for me, for example, my child did brilliantly in virtual learning. There were great benefits for her and academic achievement that I would never have seen with her in school. And why should I not be open to an option of a hybrid opportunity, or as you say, a different framework that may enable a hybrid or virtual option that gets her in bricks and mortar partially, but virtual in projects where they thrive. And it's a bit of everything, not just either or. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I think the response from parents should be to push back. And the pushback should be, we do not accept the framing of a false binary. There's not an either or situation, right? It's do I like spicy food or do I like things that are sweet? No, I like them both. And so I think what it comes down to is how do we get the best model that we have? And we have really good examples of that. A good example of that is project-based. We can do project-based. We can separate essential learning to project-based, and the essential learnings we can use a certain type of technology and a certain style for. The project-based, we can use a certain type of technology, a certain type of technique and style for. We can do that. And there are models out there. There are models out there of this already being done. So the idea of you're either going to get synchronous or synchronous, in person or not in person, I don't think it's a good place for us to be. I think because it doesn't advance the prosperity. I think that the first thing that we have to do is we really have to connect with the geographical privilege of our conversation. A lot of people think of privilege and they think about it attached to color, and that's great. That's another conversation. But the geographical privilege is we're sitting down contemplating self-actualization because the country has lots of money. There are other countries in the world that don't have it, and they're moving really, really fast. As I travel around the world, it sometimes worries me.
That's right.
It sometimes worries me. So I think we really have to look at how do we look at 2030 and how do we start building backwards? If we don't know what it's going to look like, then we know that kids have to have lots of mental frameworks. We know that they're going to have to be able to drill through that information very quickly, synthesize that information very quickly. We know that they're going to have to work with different people of different cultures from different places and different socioeconomics. So how do we start creating project-based learning like that? We know that the grades are not enough to get into Harvard. Harvard wants to see, what have you done? They want to see a digital portfolio. Can we create digital portfolios? Can we create moments when we go back? When I was working with a company making an AI platform, when we left it, we have to come back and we have to say, you know what, we could make this better. How do we do that? Why don't I have that option if I got a B on a test? Why is it in stone? I should be able to come back 2 years from now and say, let me look at that again, right? Let me get a chance again at dealing with that after I've talked with people and I've learned different things. That's how life is. So I think we have to put those components into school, and there are very, very specific ways that we can do that, leveraging analog tools, digital tools, and different techniques.
I think, Michelle, Dwayne is absolutely right. To put you into that binary situation, and I hate using the word unfair, but frankly, it's unfair because we're talking about learning and we're talking about all the facets that Dwayne has pointed out around how students learn, how we have to prepare them for 2030, not 2019. And I really believe that we are shortchanging parents, we're shortchanging students by giving them that binary decision that is almost a non-decision.
Good. Okay. So.
Wow. I like, this is like resonating with me so deeply. Like it's amazing to like look at the broader framework and the opportunity of options. So before Felicia asks her question, I think mine is a little more pragmatic. So in offering up like a broader framework and options, how does funding of public education come into play? Because it's funding. How does funding of public education come into play? Because we've seen the funding go down, 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 you know, over many, many years. Like, what are your views on that?
Well, funding plays a key role. Obviously, it plays a key role, and you see it going down, down, down. I don't think that the politicians have listened to people like Dwayne Matthews and Avis Glaze talk about the importance of A, where we're going, number one. Number two, how we prepare students. And until that happens, they will continue to take money out of education. And that is a crime. Because in fact, we need the funding to get to where we want to go. And I think we can all give you examples of what happens when that funding is no longer there to provide those opportunities for learning that we have been talking about on this panel. So it's again, you know, even that question around, is it a privilege and a right? It's both. Education is both, but you can't take away both the privilege and the right by saying you don't have the funding.
So I 100% agree with you on both pieces. It is a privilege and a right. And I think in terms of funding, I think the first thing that we have to do, we have to look at the semiotics of the situation. And so, you know, when we have semiotics, we have symbols and we have signals, and we put together into a signifying order, and that means something. And I think what we need to make it mean is not funding, but investment. We're making an investment. And if we're making an investment, then we couch that in terms of ROI. And at first it sounds a bit harsh, Dwayne, how are you going to think of ROI when you're thinking of school? But I think when we look around us, we realize that the ROI has value. And I forget the group that did the study. It was one of the big consulting firms that did a study, and it was like 25 to 1, 24 to 1, right? So for every dollar, it was a $24 ROI inside of a certain horizon. Now, if you're speaking to groups of people that are really thinking about funding, right, then you want to start thinking about ROI. You also want to tie not just ROI, but you want to tie to national security, right? You want to tie to national prosperity. You want to tie to all those things. So right now, a lot of the conversation is just around the individual. And if we're speaking to people that have a disposition towards looking at the individual and the myth of meritocracy, then we may run into problems. But if we look and we have common language where we start talking about we're making an investment into the prosperity and we can draw a direct line. I think if we start speaking in that conversation to the greater public, I think we're going to get a lot more push than people saying, I'm just going to get into a nice neighborhood.
But if we take your example, if we take just one point, if you take your example of ROI in cybersecurity, couldn't we say return on learning investment to get to where you suggested around cybersecurity? Maybe we change the language a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry,
that
sorry,
was
Avis.
correct.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say was this. I think the funding issue sometimes is a red herring. We fund what we value. We fund what we believe in. In every organization, people find money to do the things they want to do. So I really do believe it is true we have dwindling resources. But in any school district, you will see people putting the resources that they have into the things that they value and they care about. I think that's what we need to look at. Is the education of children important to us as a society? Is it important not to have poverty determine a child's destiny? And we will use whatever budget we have to raise the bar for those who need it and to close the achievement gaps. We have to do that. This is 2021, and we have widening achievement gaps with children who are absolutely able and capable of achieving. I think the problem is ours and not necessarily funding formulas.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to point out the time. It's, I'm sure we could go on for yet another hour if we could. This has been just such an inspiring conversation, and I think I speak on behalf of Dee and Michelle and Margaret. We are so pleased and thankful to have the three of you share your thoughts with us this evening. I remember a quote, and I'm like Dwayne mentioned, I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but it was that the best gift you could give a child is the gift of an education. And I know that that's something that my family values very, very much. And I would love to hear that we talk about investing in yourself and investing in our future. And that's the kind of language that, we really probably need to spread around to some of the government that we have currently in place, is that it is an investment in the future. So thank you very much, Bill, Dr. Avis, Dwayne. I'd like to say, I'm sure we would love to have you guys on again if we're able to. Thank you so much.
We are privileged. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for pulling this together. It's been a very enjoyable evening.
And
Thank you so much.
Thank you for everyone putting this together. Dr. Glaze, Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet and to be on the panel with you both. I appreciate it. Michelle, thank you very much for reaching out to me. Thank you.
Michelle's
Dr.
muted.
Glaze, did you want to say a few things?
Pardon me?
A few closing remarks, Dr. Glaze?
Oh, yes, my closing remarks. I would love to have just a few minutes. And I'm going to close with something that's very old, a notion that probably I learned when I was at OISE many years ago, but it came back to me last night. And it was the notion of finding your 15%. Now, this was popularized by W. Edwards Deming And he said essentially that we sometimes can only control maybe 15% of what happens in our organizations. And I know for some people that is very, very frustrating. We have no control over this. But if we look at how those 15% multiply, it can bring quantum change. And I saw that as a way of understanding as a young teacher. Yes, there are things over which I have control. And I'm not going to fuss about what the district is doing and all of that. I'm going to focus on over what do I have control. Find my 15%. And when we all do that, we can bring about quantum change. I hope you will get a copy of our, I hope you will see the handout we prepared for you, and make sure that that is posted so everyone can see it. But thanks for a wonderful opportunity. Find your 15%. Thank you.
And just in balance, if I could add quickly, I think it's really important that we take a look at all the domains for learning. We take a look at the emotional, the social, the physical, the academic, or the learning, and we put those in balance, because we did talk about mental health, we talked about well-being. I think it's up to us to make sure that we're always keeping those four domains in balance, that we take a look at the 15%, and we consider that if we can balance and bring those four together, that we're going to have success for our young people. So thank you. It's been a wonderful, wonderful privilege being with you.
Wow. Thank you, Bill Horga. Thank you, Dr. Avis Glaze. Thank you, Dwayne Matthews. This has been such an incredible conversation. I see the comments in the chat, best education discussion that they've heard in a while. And I totally agree. Very useful, very impactful, very meaningful. Thank you all for coming this evening. Have a great night, folks.
You too. Thank you.
Can I just quickly say thank you before you go? Thank you, Felicia. Thank you, Dee. Thank you, Margaret. The Parent Involvement Advisory Committee has supported the conversation series, making themselves available most evenings. Let me extend my thanks and appreciation to you, Wilmar, who has left. But I also want to extend a thank to our district. You know, Toronto District School Board, while we may not get it all right, boy, are we still working at it. And this conversation is made possible because we're still working at it, and that we're open to bring in voices that we need to help us moving forward. So thank you so much, Avis, for the connection to Bill. Dwayne, thank you for coming. We've not always treated you well here at the district, but we love you and we thank you so much for being with us. And I wish everyone a wonderful evening.
They haven't treated you well, Dwayne? Come on.
We'll talk about it offline.